They were the most feared soldiers of the Third Reich, marching across Europe in black uniforms that became symbols of terror. But when Nazi Germany collapsed in May, their story didn't end with surrender. Instead, it became one of the most controversial chapters in post-war history, a decades-long struggle over justice, memory, and the question of who deserves to be called a soldier. May Germany had surrendered. Across the shattered landscape of Europe, hundreds of thousands of Waffen-SS men were laying down their weapons. Units that had once struck fear into Allied and Soviet forces alike now found themselves prisoners in a continent they had devastated. The faced SS Panzer Division, Leibstandart Adolf Hitler, Das Reich, Totenkopf, and dozens of other formations were rounded up by American, British, and Soviet troops. The scale was staggering. Nearly men had served in the Waffen-SS by war's end, drawn from Germany, occupied territories, and even neutral nations. Now they faced an uncertain fate in prisoner-of-war camps that stretched from France to Siberia. Some camps were nothing more than open fields surrounded by barbed wire, where thousands of men struggled with hunger, disease, and fear. Allied commanders faced an enormous logistical challenge: how to process this mass of humanity, separating war criminals from ordinary soldiers. The legal framework came quickly. In November, the Nuremberg trials began, and prosecutors made a bold assertion: the entire SS, including its military arm, had been a criminal organization. On September, the International Military Tribunal delivered its verdict. The SS was declared a criminal entity complicit in war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the Holocaust itself. This judgment carried profound implications. Simply belonging to the Waffen-SS could now constitute a crime, though exceptions were made for those conscripted after or who could prove they had no knowledge of atrocities. For the men in the camps, this meant trials. Denazification courts were established across occupied Germany, sorting millions of former Nazis into categories, ranging from major offenders to mere followers. SS Brigadeführer Kurt Meyer, commander of the Faith SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, was tried and convicted for the massacre of Canadian prisoners in Normandy. Josef Dietrich, former commander of the Leibstandart, received a 4-year sentence for his role in the Malmedy massacre. Others faced Soviet military tribunals, where justice was often swift and sentences harsh. Thousands were executed or sent to labor camps in Siberia, never to return. Yet the vast majority of lower-ranking men were released between and Their records were marked, their reputations tainted, but they walked free into a Germany that barely recognized itself. What do you think motivated this differential treatment? Was it practical necessity or a failure of justice? The answers would shape Germany's future in ways few could have predicted. The men who returned home found a country in ruins, cities lay flattened, the economy had collapsed, and millions of Germans were displaced or starving. For former Waffen-SS members, the challenges were even greater. They were excluded from public employment, denied pensions, and barred from most veteran organizations. The name Waffen-SS had become toxic, synonymous with fanaticism and brutality. In small towns and cities across Germany, these men tried to rebuild their lives in silence. Some found work in construction, helping to clear rubble from bombed cities. Others took jobs in factories or on farms, their military skills useless in a pacified nation. Many kept their wartime service secret, removing SS blood group tattoos or destroying identification papers. The collective shame was palpable, and most Germans preferred not to ask questions about where their neighbors had served. But beneath this surface, resentment was growing. Many former SS men felt they had been unfairly singled out. They believed they had fought as soldiers, following orders like any other military unit, and now they were being punished for simply wearing the wrong uniform. This grievance, though deeply problematic from a historical perspective, would find political traction in the years to come. A minority chose a different path: escape. With the help of sympathetic networks, some former SS officers fled Europe entirely. Karl Nicolasi Lech, a decorated panzer commander, made his way to Argentina in where Juan Perfan's government welcomed former German military men. Otto Skorzeny, Hitler's favorite commando, settled in Spain after a daring escape from an American detention camp. Klaus Barbie, the notorious butcher of lion, found refuge in Bolivia with the assistance of American intelligence, who valued his anti-communist credentials more than his wartime crimes. These escape routes, later called ratlines, were facilitated by a mixture of Catholic Church officials, intelligence agencies, and fascist sympathizers. The most famous route ran through Italy to South American ports. Historians estimate that several hundred high-ranking SS officers escaped justice this way, building new lives under assumed names while their victims struggled to rebuild shattered communities. For those who stayed in Germany, the years between Fay and Fay were marked by silence and struggle. They worked menial jobs, avoided public attention, and waited for the world to forget. But the world wasn't ready to forget. Not yet. The question remained, were these men war criminals who deserved punishment, or soldiers who had simply fought for the wrong side? Then came Fay, and everything changed. The Federal Republic of Germany was established in May, creating a new democratic state under Allied supervision. West Germany's first leaders faced an impossible task, rebuilding a nation while dealing with hundreds of thousands of former Nazis, including tens of thousands of ex-Waffen-SS men. The Allies wanted strict denazification. The German public wanted stability and economic recovery. These two goals were about to collide. The Western Allies, particularly the Americans, initially maintained their position. The Waffen-SS remained a criminal organization. Its veterans were to be excluded from civil service, military service, and state pensions. But as the Cold War intensified, pragmatism began to outweigh idealism. West Germany needed votes, workers, and eventually soldiers. The Soviet threat, looming in the east, made the Americans reconsider their strict approach. By the early phase, political debates over veteran welfare dominated the Bundestag. West Germany's parliament, the Federal War Victims Relief Act of Fay, became a flashpoint. Designed to support disabled veterans and war widows, it raised a controversial question: should Waffen-SS men receive the same benefits as regular Wehrmacht soldiers? Conservative politicians, including Chancellor Konrad Adenauer, realized that excluding them would alienate a large voting bloc. In Fay, Adenauer made a public statement that shocked many. The men of the Waffen-SS, he declared, had fought as soldiers just like others. That single sentence carried enormous weight. It signaled West Germany's quiet shift toward normalizing Waffen-SS veterans as part of the broader military community. In practice, it meant many former SS men could now claim limited pensions, especially those who could prove they had been conscripted after Fay rather than volunteering earlier. Critics were outraged. Holocaust survivors, left-wing newspapers, and Allied officials condemned the policy as a betrayal of justice. But Adenauer's government held firm, prioritizing political stability over moral clarity. Do you believe post-war Germany made the right choice by reintegrating these men for the sake of stability, or should justice have taken precedence, regardless of the political consequences? The question extended to West Germany's new military force, the Bundeswehr, established in Fay. Could former Waffen-SS men serve again in uniform? The answer was complicated. In theory, they could apply. In practice, only a small fraction were accepted. Records from September Fay show that out of Fay former Waffen-SS applicants, just Fay were approved. The rest were rejected due to ideological concerns, criminal records, or pressure from Allied advisors who feared the Bundeswehr might inherit a tainted legacy. Those who made it back into uniform rarely spoke about their wartime pasts. They kept quiet, blended in, and focused on their new roles defending West Germany against Soviet aggression. For the American military advisors overseeing the Bundeswehr's development, this was an uncomfortable compromise. They needed experienced soldiers, but they couldn't afford another scandal involving former SS men. Meanwhile, beyond official channels, former Waffen-SS members were organizing. In Fay, a group led by Paul Hauser, Otto Kumm, and Felix Steiner founded HIAG, the Mutual Aid Association of former Waffen-SS members. It started as a welfare organization to support comrades denied state benefits, But it quickly evolved into something far more ambitious, a political lobby dedicated to rehabilitating the Waffen-SS reputation. HIAG's founders were former generals, articulate and well-connected men who believed the Waffen-SS had been unfairly condemned. Their central argument was simple but powerful. The Waffens, they claimed, had been an apolitical fighting force, soldiers like any other, not perpetrators of genocide. This narrative, though historically inaccurate, found a receptive audience in West Germany, where many people preferred to avoid confronting the full horror of the Nazi regime. The organization grew rapidly. By the mid-phase, HIAG had branches across West Germany and claimed tens of thousands of members. It published magazines like Der Freiwillige, meaning the volunteer, which featured articles glorifying Waffen-SS units and downplaying their involvement in atrocities. The group organized reunions where old comrades could gather, share memories, and reinforce their collective identity as misunderstood soldiers rather than war criminals. HIAG's political influence was substantial. Conservative politicians, eager to mobilize veteran votes, began courting the organization. Franz Josef Strauss, a rising star in West German politics, addressed veteran rallies. Chancellor Adenauer met privately with HIAG leaders, lending legitimacy to their cause. The organization even financed the publication of memoirs that reframed SS divisions as elite military units rather than ideological instruments of Nazi terror. Paul Hauser's Feybook, Soldiers Like Any Other, became the cornerstone of this revisionist mythology. It portrayed the Waffen-SS as brave men who had fought honorably on the battlefield, conveniently ignoring their participation in mass shootings, village burnings, and anti-partisan operations that killed countless civilians. American and British historians challenged these claims, but in Germany, the narrative took hold. Yet even as HIAG gained influence, cracks began to appear. Germany's younger generation, born during or after the war, started asking uncomfortable questions about their parents' generation. By the phase, a cultural shift was underway. Students protested, demanding their country confront its Nazi past rather than sweeping it under the rug. Journalists began investigating HIAG's activities, exposing its efforts to minimize war crimes and pressure officials on pension reforms. In Der Spiegel, Germany's leading news magazine, published a devastating investigation revealing HIAG's deep political ties and its systematic attempts to rehabilitate war criminals. The scandal marked a turning point. Mainstream political parties began distancing themselves from the organization. Public tolerance for Waffen-SS glorification eroded rapidly. Yet HIAG remained active for another decade, sustained by aging veterans, determined to defend their version of history against mounting evidence to the contrary. Can a society truly move forward without fully confronting its past? Or is some degree of historical amnesia necessary for national reconciliation? Germany's struggle with this question continues to resonate today. By the phase, HIAG's membership was declining as its members aged and died. The organization fought increasingly futile battles over memorials and cemetery plaques, while anti-fascist groups protested Waffen's reunions with growing intensity. In facing dwindling ranks and public disapproval, HIAG officially dissolved. Many believe this would finally close the chapter on the Waffen-SS controversy. They were wrong. The fall of the Berlin Wall in and German reunification brought new challenges. Newly opened archives in East Germany and the former Soviet Union revealed previously hidden details about Waffen-SS operations. Historians gained access to documents showing how SS units had worked closely with Einsatzgruppen death squads, participated in anti-Jewish operations, and committed countless atrocities against civilians. The myth of the clean Waffen-SS soldiers, who had simply fought honorably on the battlefield, crumbled under the weight of documentary evidence. Yet even as scholarship dismantled these illusions, new controversies emerged. In the phase, journalists discovered that some former Waffen-SS members were still receiving state pensions under the old Federal War Victims Relief Act. Reports in Der Spiegel and the New York Times sparked international outrage, especially when it became clear that many Holocaust survivors had never received comparable compensation. German governments debated reforms, but pension laws, rooted in post-war legal compromises, proved extraordinarily difficult to undo. Beyond Germany's borders, the Waffen-SS legacy took on troubling new forms. In parts of Eastern Europe, particularly the Baltic states and Ukraine, veterans of locally recruited SS divisions began to be commemorated as national heroes who had fought against Soviet occupation. Annual marches in Riga honored the Faith and Faith Latvian SS divisions, drawing sharp criticism from Jewish organizations and the European Parliament. These events underscored how the image of the Waffens had become entangled with post-Soviet identity politics, with some nations attempting to separate anti-Soviet resistance from collaboration with Nazi genocide. Inside Germany, attitudes continued to shift. By the Fez, open admiration for the Waffen had become completely taboo. Displaying SS symbols was banned under Section Fea of the Criminal Code, with violators facing fines or imprisonment. Yet far-right groups online continued to use SS imagery, portraying the Waffen as models of strength and European brotherhood. German authorities cracked down repeatedly, viewing this glorification as a direct threat to democratic values. In academic circles, the conversation moved beyond simple moral judgment to deeper historical analysis. Scholars like S. Fenke Neitzel and Peter Longdrich examined how ideology, discipline, and violence fused within the Waffen's structure. Their research emphasized that the organization was never separate from Nazi politics. It was, from its inception, the armed extension of an ideology built on racial hatred and genocidal ambition. The Waffen didn't just fight battles, it implemented Nazi racial policy at gunpoint, massacring Jews, Roma, and Slavic civilians across Eastern Europe. Social historians explored how post-war Germany's silence toward the Waffen-SS reflected the nation's broader struggle with guilt and memory. The decision to reintegrate SS veterans in the phase, they argued, represented a society's attempt to move forward, without fully reckoning with its past. This choice brought stability and economic recovery, but at a moral cost that would take decades to acknowledge. American policymakers, looking back, acknowledged their own role in this complex history. The decision to prioritize Cold War stability over complete denazification had enabled many former SS men to escape full accountability. Intelligence agencies had even employed some, valuing their anti-communist credentials more than their criminal pasts. These compromises, made in the name of defeating Soviet communism, remain controversial among historians today. Today, few Waffen-SS veterans remain alive. The youngest would be in their late 90s, their associations have vanished, their reunions ended, their magazines ceased publication, yet their legacy endures in the debates, books, and myths that still surround them. Museums across Germany now present the unvarnished truth about the Waffen-SS, its crimes documented in painful detail. Educational programs ensure that young Germans understand this history without romanticization or revisionism. 80 years after the war's end, the story of what happened to the Waffen-SS after Fey remains a warning. It is a warning about how easily history can be reshaped to serve political needs, about how societies struggling with trauma and guilt might choose convenient narratives over uncomfortable truths, about how justice delayed can become justice denied for victims who never saw their persecutors held accountable. The men who wore the SS runes fought their last battle, not with weapons, but over memory itself. In the end, historical truth prevailed, but only after decades of denial, debate, and painful reckoning. Their story reminds us that confronting the past, however difficult, remains essential for any society hoping to build a just future.